numbers at the top.
Hi, I'm going to talk to you about infection prevention today because a lot of what you do is infection prevention, whether you realize it or not. So if I were there live, I'd ask you what is the best way to prevent the spread of infection? And I'm sure you're thinking right now, and hopefully somebody's saying hand hygiene. We call it hand hygiene because we can either wash our hands or use hand sanitizer. The CDC, you'll hear me refer to them a couple of times, the Centers for Disease Control, they recommend hand sanitizing over hand washing, except in a few situations that we'll talk about. So think about why they would say that. Why would they say use hand sanitizer? One reason is mainly because we're more compliant with it. It takes, to properly wash your hands with soap and water, it's going to take 30 seconds. So we don't have that kind of time going in and out of the resident's room. So we want to use hand sanitizer in and out of every room. Inside of every resident's room, you're going to find the hand sanitizer in the blue container. You'll see it inside the entrances to the nursing home. You'll see it in any common area, the dining rooms, the TV rooms, the sitting rooms, the pod areas. There's always hand sanitizer, so nobody can ever say they didn't do it because they didn't have access. So it's always there. You want to make sure that you get, I've got a little bit of portable stuff here, that you get enough hand sanitizer to really get your hands really well. You want to get in between your fingers, you want to get under your nails, you want to go like this so that you get under your nails because that's where the germs like to hang out, all the way up to your wrists. And by the time you're done with all of that, it's dry and you're ready to go. Some people think they can just put gloves on and skip hand sanitizer. You don't want to do that because sometimes the gloves may have just tiny little pores in them that they leak a little bit, or your nails may poke through, which is why we ask you to have your nails kept trim. But you don't want to just put gloves on. You want to wear the hand sanitizer. You want to use the hand sanitizer. So you want to get into the habit of every time you go in a room, every time you go out of a room, to use your hand sanitizer. And sometimes you come out of one room into another room, straight into the other room, you don't touch anything. But sometimes you come out of the room and there might be a wheelchair there, and that wheelchair the handles may have been touched by 10 or 15 different people. So you want to make sure that that you get into the habit of just on your way in, on your way out, even if you haven't touched anything, because then it just becomes a habit. You don't even have to think about it. It's just something you naturally do on your way in and on your way out. You also want to think about, if you noticed when you came through the facility, that most of the residents have 2 residents in each room. So you want to really think about those like they are 2 separate rooms. There's not a wall there, but you draw kind of an imaginary line down the middle of the room that separates resident by the door to resident by the window, or over on SCU, the one on the left, the one on the right. And you don't want to cross over that line into the other room without taking off your gloves and using hand sanitizer, because that's how we transmit things. If we have 2 residents that are bedbound, that we're changing them, and we don't change our gloves in between in the same room, that's how we share germs. So make sure you're always doing that. Sometimes I see people in the hallway with gloves on, and I know that they didn't sanitize, because if you have your gloves on, you can't. Or sometimes they'll just have one glove, one hand ungloved, and the other one they pull the glove over the bag to carry. Well, they couldn't have sanitized then. So please, that is, if we come out of the room with unclean hands, and every surface we touch, every door handle, every code on the door, we are sharing whatever germs came from that room. So please be careful and be sure that you hand sanitize. There's some times where you have to use soap and water. So maybe think about when that might be, where you would have to use soap and water. So one thing would be if you have any visible soil on your hands. If there's anything on your hands, you want to use soap and water, because you don't want to just use hand sanitizer and just get it all over your hands that way. So you want to use soap and water if there's any visible soil on your hands, if you've touched any body fluids or anything like that without gloves on, which you shouldn't. The other thing is, after you use the bathroom, before you eat, and if a resident is on C. diff precautions, you want to use soap and water. We'll talk about C. diff a little bit later. So for the most part, you're going to use hand sanitizer. You'll hand wash in those situations. We have to observe how well the staff does with their hand hygiene. So there may be somebody asking you to be a secret shopper, which means that you watch and see how the other staff does when they're coming in and out of rooms, if they're using hand sanitizer or soap and water. Or somebody may come up to you and say, I observed and you hadn't used your hand sanitizer. You know what? None of us are perfect. We're going to make mistakes at times. Don't take it as an insult. Just take it as, okay, next time I'll be more careful. And if you notice that somebody's not consistently using hand sanitizer or washing their hands, please let the IP know so that we can then, go and observe and re-educate as needed. That's about it on hand sanitizing. We're going to talk about isolation. There are times where some of our residents may need to be on isolation. Some reasons that would be shingles, and you'll probably at some point today see some pictures of what shingles looks like. And just so you know, how we get shingles is if you've already had chickenpox, that virus stays in your body, it just goes dormant and goes to sleep. And when your own body reactivates it, that's shingles. Now, if I have shingles, you can't catch shingles from me. However, if you've not had chickenpox and I have shingles, you could get chickenpox from me. So that's why we put people in isolation, because if they have shingles, because our elderly population, if they get the chickenpox, it could actually kill them. It could go to their lungs or their brain, and they can die from it. Not like when you're a child and you just have a short little illness and itchiness. So we take that seriously if somebody has shingles. Something else, like you've all heard of MRSA or MRSA, a wound that gets infected and grows out MRSA. That's called a multi-drug resistant organism. It's caused from overuse and misuse of antibiotics, but there's VRE, CRE, ESBL, all kinds of big long names for bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. If anybody has one of those, we put them on isolation. If somebody had scabies, we had somebody come in a couple years ago with scabies, we put him on isolation. And then C. diff. So we're going to talk a little bit about diarrhea, because nursing and CNAs tend to use loose stools and diarrhea interchangeably as if they're the same thing, and they're really not. A lot of your residents will have loose stools because they're tube fed, or they're dependent upon they're constipated and they take medicine to help that. So sometimes your residents, you just have to get to know them. They're going to have loose stools normally. But diarrhea is watery. Tori, can you pass me my water? Yes, thank you. Diarrhea is watery. It's watery, just like what's in this bottle here. It doesn't have any solid matter in it. It's just water. That's diarrhea. If it's not watery, we really shouldn't call it diarrhea. We should call it loose stools. Now, if your resident has diarrhea, you need to immediately, if you're a CNA, you need to immediately let your nurse know. If you're the nurse, you need to look and see, well, has this person just had a laxative? Maybe they were constipated for a couple of days and we gave them a laxative. That would account for it. So make sure that you let your nurse know right away, because our policy says if they have 3 diarrhea stools within 24 hours, we have to send the stool to the lab for C. diff and culture, WBCs, and O&P. So when they have that first one, we're generally going to watch. The nurse is going to watch. They're going to kind of be on heightened alert. Okay, this person's had 1 diarrhea stool. If they have a second one within 24 hours, we're going to put them on isolation after the second one. Now, if they have that third one, then we're going to go ahead and send the stool for the C. diff and everything else. But they've already been on isolation after that second one. So it's very important for CNAs to report to nurses what's going on, and for the nurses to do what needs to happen. So C. diff, the reason why we don't use hand sanitizer with C. diff is because the spores that reproduce when you have C. diff, they are not killed by hand sanitizer. The alcohol that's in the hand sanitizer that kills just about everything else that you might see here does not kill the spores in C. diff. So we wash our hands not to kill the spores, but the soap acts as a lubricant, and any that might be on your hand will be washed down the drain. And you need to know that C. diff spores can live on this tabletop here for 5 to 7 months unless they're killed by bleach. So that's why C. diff is one that we put up on isolation, and we have to do really good environmental cleaning. If somebody has signs on their door that says bleach clean, we put those on when somebody is having diarrhea and we suspect C. diff. So if you see bleach clean,